The slogan, "We're all in this together," is a collectivist mantra. The message being promoted is not one of individual liberty and personal freedom. It's one of subservience to dictatorial decrees. What's good about perceived security if you don't have your freedom?
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Apologies for going on a bit too long in some of my questions and comments in this thing. I'm just really excited to see silver at $23 an ounce. It feels like something very seismic has changed in the silver market. So I hope you enjoy this interview. The other note is I posted a very important video called Red Rooms to my YouTube backup channel. Guys, on June 22nd, Dutch police located one of these facilities, Red Rooms, where they torture and kill children on live streaming video. It's a very, very important story, and it's on my backup YouTube channel and over on BitChute right now. I'll leave a link below. Now friends, the interview you're about to hear is all about silver. And silver's on fire. Gold too. Great places to put your money. But cryptos are a good place to put your money too. And if anyone's thinking about getting into a cryptocurrency IRA, right now may be the time to do it. Bitcoin is up 30% from its bottom here in 2020, and most leading commentators believe that Bitcoin has just started its climb. Crypto pioneer Adam Back actually thinks it will soar to $300,000 in the next 5 years. Even if it does just 10% of that, that's $30,000 Bitcoin, which would buy you a very happy retirement. So give Noble Bitcoin a call and talk to their crypto experts about moving your IRA or 401k over to cryptos. You'll get tax breaks and peace of mind for starters. Visit noblebitcoin.com or call Noble Gold today at 877-646-5347 and get the ball rolling this July. Again, that's noblebitcoin.com. I'll leave a link below this interview. Guys, what a timely interview I have for you today. As serendipity would have it, silver just passed $23 an ounce. And I have some tweets I want to share with you in a second. But the interview today is with Stuart Englert, and the name of his book is Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History, published just this past January 2020. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Sean. Good to be with you on this day when silver is rolling up the hill, so to speak. And we haven't seen this kind of move for quite a while.
Well, I made a video just the other day. I interviewed my friend James Anderson from SD Bullion, and I titled that interview, "If you only watch one silver interview this year, it should be this one." I even tweeted about it on July 19th. USD $19 silver will be a distant memory in coming years, Stuart. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. And today I just tweeted $19 then, $23 now. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. JP Morgan is being investigated under RICO statutes. The DOJ has called JP Morgan's Precious Metals Trading Desk a criminal enterprise. Folks, the rocket ship is about to take off. What a timely interview. Let me just read a little bit about Stuart's book, Rigged. The largest financial fraud in history wasn't Enron's colossal accounting crimes, Bernie Madoff's record-setting Ponzi, or the LIBOR scandal. I'll jump down. Nope, the biggest fraud in history is a financial scheme perpetrated by the U.S. government and its banking accomplices. Over the last century, they've used coercion, deception, and market manipulation to convince Americans the U.S. dollar is as good as gold and silver. The truth is, it's not. I'll stop the screen share there, Stuart, and welcome you again to the show. How are you, man?
I'm doing real good today. It's good to see silver getting its just desserts finally. There could be another smackdown. You know, we've seen this game played before, but I feel real good about where the precious metal markets are now. And it looks like the bankers are losing control of their shorts. And I hope they lose their shorts, you know?
Well, as my friend Bix Weir pointed out in a video today, he's pointed out so many times before in conversations we've had, the only people really short silver right now are 8 criminal banks. And it seems to me that the DOJ is trying to rein in the biggest one of all, JP Morgan.
And if they do that, I think it's to the moon for silver and gold.
I've been saying, Stuart, and I tried to really drive the point home in that interview with James Anderson, that in my view, this is not investment advice, but friends, just look at the U.S. debt clock. $26, $27 trillion and climbing, and that doesn't include the unfunded liabilities like Social Security, Medicare, etc. Silver, in my view, Stuart, is the most undervalued tangible asset in the world right now. $23 an ounce silver is still incredibly cheap, given all the dollars and all the euros and all the yen and all the yuan. It's so cheap.
I agree with you. I agree that it's the most underpriced metal commodity in the world, and it's also been the most manipulated. And that's why it's so refreshing to see the price finally gaining and gaining incredibly. Yesterday was a 5% gain, and today we're seeing 6.68, and it's still climbing.
And the point I've tried to make repeatedly over the years, because a lot of folks don't understand silver, they don't understand market rigging like you do, they don't understand the Comex and how it works, but the point I've made consistently is that on some days, many days, on the Comex, silver will be traded in paper form, some 600 million or more ounces in a single day, which rivals the total amount of physical silver mined out of planet Earth in a year. In some weeks, Stuart, it's many times the annual amount of physical pulled out of the ground. That's why silver's so cheap, folks, because it's been manipulated for so long.
One other thing, one other headline I read yesterday that may be lighting a fire under silver. Eric Sprott. You familiar with Sprott's?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I've interviewed Eric Sprott, and I'm very familiar with his physical silver trust, and I know he wants to add, I think, $1.5 billion worth of physical silver to the trust.
That is correct, and that's about 9% of annual silver worldwide production, if you can imagine that. If he can raise those funds and buy that much silver, we're going to continue to see silver decline in price.
Yeah, the other point I want to make for folks listening, if you're new to this precious metals game, I want people to understand that silver is mined at a rate of 9-to-1 gold, which means these mining companies that mine the physical stuff, guys, for every 1 ounce of gold they find, they're only finding 9 or 10 ounces of silver. This rigging job, guys, is going to collapse because one thing's for certain, Stuart, the dollar is not going to have the purchasing power it has today in the next year, 5 years, or 10. And that's how you protect your wealth, folks, with physical precious metals, tangible assets, not paper.
Yeah, that's right. Silver is a great hedge against the declining, devalued dollar. The dollar's purchasing power is decreasing. It's declined 98% against gold since 1971. And it's going to continue to decline as long as the U.S. government is printing money, spending money. As you know, the debt is climbing. It's never climbed like this before. When I published my book in January, the national debt was 23 trillion. Okay, here we are, 7.5 months later, and we're at $26.5 trillion in debt. And depending on what Congress does in the next couple of weeks, we could see that climb another 1, 2, 3, who knows how many $trillion before the end of the fiscal year.
All right, let's turn our attention to your book. And I want people to read the book. So I don't want to go through every single chapter and just give it away for free here. People should go to Amazon and buy the book.
Would you like me to go into how I went about writing the book?
Yeah, I think so, because, many of my listeners are well aware of what happened in 1913 and what happened at Jekyll Island with these Viper bankers. Many of us are aware of the history and the foundations of the Federal Reserve, but how did you come to write the book? What sparked your interest in writing the book?
Well, are you familiar with the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, or GATA?
Oh, of course, yeah. I know. Well, Bix Weir, I've interviewed a bunch of guys from GATA, Bill Murphy and others. Yeah.
The organization, for your readers or listeners, the organization was founded in 1999 by Bill Murphy and Chris Powell to expose precious metals manipulation and price suppression. I've been following GATA's website, gata.org, for at least the last 10 to 12 years. And about 2 years ago, I went to Chris Powell, who is GATA's secretary-treasurer, and asked him if he'd like to write a book about precious metal manipulation. He's really an authority on the subject. And since I published books, I told him I would publish a book for him. Well, at the time, he said he was too busy and he didn't have time. Last fall, I had some time. So it took me about 3 months, but I delved into the documents in GATA's online archives, and I decided to write the book. I was kind of a skeptic at first, okay, about the whole manipulation scheme. But the more I read the documents, the more I saw the evidence, the more I was convinced I had to write this book. I set out to write a primer or a guide for people unfamiliar with the subject. I wanted the layman to be able to understand it. So I tried to convey details as simply as I could, avoiding as much technical language as possible so that people didn't want to stop reading. I don't know whether I've accomplished that or not, but others have said the book is concise and well-researched, and someone can read it in a couple of hours, unless they get into the endnotes. I've included 59 endnotes so readers and researchers can confirm the information that I'm presenting in the book.
Give us the cliff notes on the rig job. Which banks are most heavily involved? I would say probably JP Morgan is number one. JP Morgan, by the way, controls the Silver Trust, the ETF, SLV. Who controls the Gold Trust? Is it Deutsche Bank? GLD?
GLD. HSBC, I think, is involved.
Yeah, another criminal bank.
The manipulation is expansive. It goes beyond just the bullion banks. The manipulators are the U.S. government through its Exchange Stabilization Fund, at the Federal Reserve, as you know, because it and other central banks around the world are involved, along with the bullion banks like JP Morgan and HSBC and Deutsche Bank, as well as, these are often overlooked, the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements, which is known as the Central Bank of Central Banks, and it's based in Basel, Switzerland.
Yeah, and let me just share this with folks, Stuart. What people need to understand, I just mentioned that JP Morgan controls the SLV, that ETF. Well, in my view, and it's pretty obvious, but that ETF was created to quell the demand for physical silver through paper. So people could feel like, oh, I've made an investment in silver and gold because I bought the ETF GLD or the ETF SLV. And guess who's guarding the chicken coop? The fox, JP Morgan. So They control the SLV, they control that whole story, they control the SLV warehouse. Nobody knows how much physical silver is actually there in a warehouse backing up all of those paper promises of those people that think they have an ounce of silver or an ounce of gold. And the other thing I want to share is that recently it came to light that the Comex is so low on physical gold supplies that people who stand for delivery through Comex paper contracts, those deliveries were being satisfied through the LBMA because physical gold is in such short supply on the Comex. Stuart?
Yes, that's absolutely right. The word that I'm getting is that, the Comex doesn't have the liquidity, the gold and silver to fulfill all of these orders. It's scrambling. It's actually, you've probably read the stories of silver and gold being imported into the United States. And I don't ever recall that happening. It's coming from Switzerland. It's coming from Australia. And that tells me that the bullion bankers are in trouble and they're having trouble fulfilling the delivery requests on Comex.
I think the time is up on the silver and gold rigging. So I think people are really getting one last chance to get physical silver at these prices. I mean, because again, the Federal Reserve cannot stop printing, Stuart. And that gets us right back to the problem here, right? These big central banks have controlled this crooked game for too long.
They can't get out of this because, as you probably know, this QE to infinity, the creation of infinite money by the Federal Reserve, is an attempt to prolong the life of this dying monetary and corrupt financial system. It's also an effort that will prolong pain and suffering for many people. And who knows, maybe that's the purpose. Political leaders and bankers often use times of crisis, hardship, and desperation to consolidate and maintain their control and power. In 1934, as you might recall, President Franklin Roosevelt required Americans to surrender their gold to the banks under the guise of ending the Great Depression. Some 4,000 tons of gold were surrendered at the time, and gold ownership became illegal. And that's when the gold standard domestically ended.
It's funny, Stuart, there have been times in American history where I'm surprised people didn't revolt. I'm surprised we didn't have a second American Revolution. And now we're seeing stuff like that again, but we're seeing it through the tyranny of governors like Jerry Brown when he was governor of California, passing SB 277, mandatory vaccines.
Right.
And we may be seeing more of that with this COVID vaccine when they roll that out, Stuart.
We very well may. You know, from the outset, I thought there was much more to these lockdowns and economic disruptions than the virus. I'm not saying COVID doesn't exist or that people haven't died from it, but the economic destruction is being used for other purposes as well, political and possibly monetary. The political motives are obvious, given that this is an election year and Democrats want to unseat Trump. At this point, a sick and weak economy is a far bigger threat to Trump than an infectious virus. So some partisan governors and mayors are crippling the economy and keeping it on life support until November. Thanks to the politicians and mass media, many Americans are focused on the virus rather than the consequences of the lockdowns and business shutdowns and the economic ruin being caused by millions of job losses, the flood of bankruptcies and approaching evictions and foreclosures. The virus also is being used to promote further centralization of political and financial power and regulatory control. Have you heard about the World Economic Forum's proposed Great Reset of Capitalism?
Well, yeah, I've been following the World Economic Forum, and I know they want to introduce a new system. They're well aware that this current system is collapsing or needs to collapse or is going to collapse.
That's right. And I think it's a plot by the elitists to introduce worldwide socialism and a global system to regulate, tax, and monitor everyone and everything for the purported greater good. You know, a monetary reset and global currency is likely another goal to this scheme. The International Monetary Fund is calling for a larger role for its strategic drawing rights, or SDRs as they're known, which are essentially a currency exchange among the world's central banks. They're not exchanged by individuals or corporations, but who knows? To give this a new system credibility, these SDRs may have to be backed by gold, as they were when they were created in 1969. You know, this whole COVID-19 thing also is being used for social conditioning purposes as well. The slogan, "We're all in this together," is a collectivist mantra. The message being promoted is not one of individual liberty and personal freedom. It's one of subservience to dictatorial decrees, supposedly for the greater good. But what's good about perceived security if you don't have your freedom?
Well, that's right. And you just hit the nail on the head regarding COVID. The Rockefeller Foundation released a paper back in, I think it was 2000. I don't have it in front of me. I think it was 2010. Page 18 of that paper was lockstep. More top-down authoritarian control amidst growing citizen pushback, and the chapter was written about more authoritarian control on the back of a pandemic. Let me round out the thought here. Rockefeller Financial Services is J.P. Morgan Chase, and right. J.P. Morgan is the silver rigger.
One and the same.
It's shocking. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, lockstep. You're right. The big banks. Aaron Russo got it right. Did you ever see that interview that Alex Jones did with Aaron Russo?
I sure did.
I've been saying, Stuart, for as long as I've had this channel, that the enemy of humanity, the ultimate enemy of humanity, are these big criminal banks.
Yes, I agree with you. And they've been doing criminal activity for decades, for generations. And the sad part is the federal government has been in cahoots with them. They've colluded to suppress gold and silver prices to defend the dollar and its role as the world's reserve currency. But I truly believe that's coming to an end. I think the dollar's days are numbered. It's a fiat currency. It's had a good run, but the writing is on the wall. The United States cannot continue to run these exorbitant deficits every year, year after year after year, along with trade deficits, and expect people to buy our debt. Much of the rest of the world, as you know, is tired of it. The Chinese and the Russians have stopped buying our debt. They've actually sold all their debt, okay? And I think that's one of the reasons there's so much warmongering going on against the Russians and the Chinese at this point.
Yeah. Let me ask you something about the stock market versus precious metals rigging. Are these stocks being run up, for instance, Tesla at $1,600 per share, which is pure lunacy, and Amazon at $3,179 a share? Are these shares being run up to try to get people around the world to just look at stock markets and think about stock markets and want to be in paper and want to chase these asset prices higher so that they don't look at silver and gold? And is that why silver and gold have been suppressed? Because the minute silver and gold begin to run like these stocks, that will be the point at which people all around the world realize the US dollar is done.
Yes. The flood of funny money being created by the Federal Reserve is being used to reinflate stock market bubble once again. We've seen this game over and over. Elevating equity prices is one tool that's used by the Federal Reserve to instill confidence, or attempt to, and make it appear the economy is healthy and growing, stable, if you will, even if it's not. But it's an illusion, particularly for the 45% of Americans who don't own stocks. Without sound money, most financial markets are an illusion. Not only are equity and precious metal prices rigged, but the banks also have been fined billions of dollars for rigging bond prices, interest rates, and foreign exchange markets. The entire financial and monetary system is fraught with fraud. It's divorced from free market reality. And my book, by the way, is dedicated to free markets and sound money.
Have you looked into much of the bond fraud? I do recall an interview that Max Kaiser did. I think it was the interview that really introduced me to Max Kaiser. And I'm like, who is this guy? I love this guy. He did an interview and he talked about the tens of billions of dollars of bond fraud that was all hidden on the back of 9/11 because evidently 100 billion, maybe more, worth of bonds were supposed to mature on September 12th. And those bonds were all in the Twin Towers, and we all know what happened on September 11th.
Yeah, I haven't researched that, but I do recall that conversation and hearing about that. But I'm not an expert in that area. But I do know these zero interest rates, and that's essentially where we're at now. In some places around the world, we have negative interest rates, are going to have very negative ramifications, but very positive ramifications for gold and silver. Zero interest rates are an indication that fiat currencies and their associated debt and credit are effectively worthless. Zero or negative interest rates will drive gold and silver prices even higher. If bonds and cash don't pay yields and interest, more people lose confidence in the monetary system and convert their dollars and fiat currencies into precious metals. And that's happening right now. That's why we're seeing rising demand for gold, silver, and that's, I think, why we're seeing the price spiking in gold and silver today.
I think you're right. How do we free ourselves from this monstrous grip these international bankers have on we the people and on nation states, Stuart?
Well, I think we have to educate ourselves about the rigging. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. GATA has been trying to get out this word for 20 years, and the mass media won't pick it up. So I said a book needed to be written, something that was small, understandable, concise, to the point, and that's what I try to do. And once people understand how the markets are rigged, then they're going to turn to gold and silver to protect their wealth. The way I see it, market manipulation is hidden in plain sight. Despite reams of documentary evidence compiled by GATA, most Americans don't know that our currency and financial markets are manipulated. Many know something's not right, but they can't put their finger on it because it's a complicated scheme, and they have a tough time understanding the jargon and methods used. I mean, just listen to our former past and present Federal Reserve chairmen like Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, and Jerome Powell. I mean, it'll almost put you to sleep, right? But some folks don't want to think ill of our government. They want to trust the people in positions of authority to ensure fair and free markets and sound money. Unfortunately, what we have is misplaced trust. And that's another reason the scheme continues. But that's why we need to educate ourselves.
All right, one other question for you here. Have you been following what's been going on this year with the Fed and with Trump? And what's your view on ending the Fed? Has the Fed actually been ended, or is it still firmly under the control of the Rothschild-Rockefeller banking cabal?
That's a really good question. I'm somewhat disappointed that President Trump hasn't done more to expose the Fed at this point. There is a representative out of West Virginia, Alex Mooney. Are you familiar with him? He is trying to gain support through legislation to have the nation's gold supply audited and to have the Federal Reserve audited and to stop taxing gold and silver. But he's not getting a lot of support. And, he's like a voice out in the cold, just like Ron Paul was, back during his presidential runs in 2008 and 2012, I guess. I don't know. I don't see a lot of hope right now, but if the Department of Justice is putting pressure on JP Morgan to get out of this rigging business, that could be a good thing. And who knows, maybe Trump is behind some of that.
Yeah. Hey, well, regarding the audit of Fort Knox, we don't really need it, Stuart. Wasn't it Steve Mnuchin who visited Fort Knox and then came out and said, the gold's fine. It's all there.
He said, gold is safe, I think is what he said. But that can have many different interpretations.
Oh, absolutely.
That doesn't necessarily mean it's there.
It also doesn't suggest ownership. I mean, here's the problem with physical gold, wherever it's stored. So much of this gold has been hypothecated and rehypothecated, meaning promised to multiple parties. And those parties hold paper promises saying that they have gold and it's safe somewhere in a vault. See, this is how the whole scheme began with these Rothschilds and these bankers a couple hundred centuries ago. We will store your gold. It's heavy. It's cumbersome. Give us your gold and we will give you a paper gold certificate. And that worked great until they started to give out 9 or 10 certificates for every 1 ounce of gold. And that's how they built unimaginable wealth.
That's right.
Paper promises.
And they're continuing to do it in the gold and silver market. We can only hope that physical demand outpaces the paper fraud and that people request physical delivery, hold it not in the banks, but in trusted private vaults or in their own vaults, and we can end the scheme.
All right. Well, the scheme's going to end one way or the other, and for those who are unprepared and don't have any tangible assets, it's not going to end as well as it will for those who do, but I think it's going to end pretty badly for everybody. And we're going to go through a really difficult period, a transition here, and hopefully we come out on the other side free of these criminal bankers. But in my view, Stuart, the only way that's actually going to happen is if we arrest these criminal bankers. And when they own most all of the politicians and the most important corporations and the majority of the world's wealth, unfortunately, that is an uphill battle.
That's a tall order. I don't see it happen. But if at least we can educate the people about what's going on so we can apply the political pressure so that we can get to the truth and put the criminal bankers out of business.
Absolutely. All right. So the name of the book, Rigged, Exposing the Largest Financial Fraud in History by Stuart Englert. Is Amazon the best place to get it? I hate Amazon. I can't stand Jeff Bezos and Bezos blog, Washington Post. We don't want to give these people another nickel.
Well, I understand. And the only thing, if people don't want to order it off of Amazon, the only thing I can do, I do provide signed copies. I will mail it to people if they email me at srenglert, that's ENGLERT, at Comcast.net. And I will tell them how they can order a copy. But that's the only other way that I have right now, Sean, to sell my book. You know, in one way, I was thinking Amazon might ban this book. They haven't yet, but maybe the sales haven't been large enough, you know. I have been pleasantly surprised, though, about this book. I mean, the sales were so brisk during the first 3 weeks after publication in January that Amazon ranked it the #1 new release in its money and monetary policy category. And the book's also gained an international audience. About 1/5 of the sales have been abroad. People have been purchasing copies in Australia, Canada, France, Germany, India, Japan, and Great Britain. I've been quite pleasantly surprised with that. And this is a global story. It's worldwide. And I hope people read my book.
Guys, our guest has been Stuart Englert. The book, Rigged. Go out and grab a copy. Stuart, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks so much for the invitation, Sean.
Yeah, my pleasure. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. A very special thank you to our patrons who are keeping us in the fight for truth and real news. Without you guys, it would be very, very difficult since YouTube also has rigged the game against truth. And guys, you can always visit us directly and find my latest 3 videos at the very top of SGTReport.com, along with the real news of the day 24/7, the antidote to corporate propaganda in Mockingbird mainstream media lies. God bless.
They just did a report last week showing that some 1,300 epidemiologists and other people in the health industry were supporting all of these protests from Black Lives Matter. But yet they were against the protests, for example, in Michigan and Ohio, of people protesting the lockdown.